Welcome everyone this evening to our special presentation with Peter Robbins this evening. We're going to be talking about the 1978 UFO Committee Initiative. So without further ado, Peter Robbins, welcome again to the Western Connecticut UFO Conference presented by the Danbury Library.
Thank you, Aurelio. I'm delighted to be back.
So go ahead, if you want.
Okay.
Can see the screen, and we'll just go ahead from there.
Let's bring up that first image.
And you can see that right here. Hold on a second, sorry. There we go.
On a quiet Friday in early October 1977, the Prime Minister of a small Caribbean country called Grenada made his way to the lectern in the United Nations General Assembly Hall. It was a talk that, it was a presentation that did not surprise quite a number of the delegates. Sir Eric Gairy, the Prime Minister at the time, was well known for having been very outspoken about the reality of UFOs and made it very clear that he had seen them himself. He also had open-minded views on other paranormal aspects, but he requested that the General Assembly consider establishing a permanent committee to study this subject. Next image. The next day's New York Times carried the article you just saw, and this is part of it. Needless to say, this was still the age of UFO ridicule, and being such a small country, it was easy for them to not fully take it seriously. And at the same time, it was real news. And in fact, about a month before this, Prime Minister Gairy met with President Carter, who had also had a UFO sighting and shared his feelings on the subject that they were real and should be investigated. Next. It's a picture of Sir Eric Gairy from the cover of the nomenclature that was issued for that day. The request went all the way up to the Secretary General, Kurt Waldheim at the time, who also had a serious interest in the subject. And it was agreed that the following year, they would actually commence hearings on this subject. This is, as noted in the title piece, a personal reminiscence. I was there. I was all of about a year and a half or 2 years into my obsession with the subject. And next slide. My very first mentor, a name that really has been lost to ufology in America, but is still honored in Hungary, his native country. And for those of us who were fortunate to know him, Koman von Kavetsky was, during World War II, in charge of audio-visual education for Hungarian army troops and photo analysis. He emigrated to the United States in 1952, a few months before the famous Washington, D.C. UFO overflights. And from that point on, he was hooked. He brought me into the subject of this hearing with the understanding that the Secretary General, who he knew socially, had invited him to prepare a paper on what we felt was a very important aspect of the whole UFO situation at the time. Next. Coleman had an organization called ICUFON. I forget all of the what it stands for, but it was a serious UFO research organization. And I was invited to work on the paper as an editor. Bear in mind that I had never even been to a UFO conference. I still did not know many people in the field. And it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. Next, please. This is the acknowledgments for that paper, which was about 80 pages long, actually. And here I am, just a line or two away from Professor Hermann Oberth, the father of German rocketry. Not that there's any comparison there, but it certainly did affect my perception of how important this meeting was. The subject of his paper, which still is important enough, was what would happen if a genuine UFO incursion took place, say, over the Soviet Union and was misinterpreted as an American hostile strike, or vice versa. The potential and the possibility for truly anomalous UFOs that refused or simply did not identify themselves as such when asked to by conventional means could trigger a nuclear conflagration was serious indeed. Anyway, Sir Eric agreed, and it was put on the docket for the UN. Next, please. This is one of the pages of Coleman's large paper, and it's a photograph that was included in the presentation, one of the best at the time that we had. Mr. Peterson walking his dog in Jutland, Denmark, out with his camera, photographed a fully articulated disc generating cloud cover. There were several photos. This is the second. The first one was just the disc. Here you see what seems like a smoke trail. By the third one, it was almost completely enmeshed in a cloud that had created itself. The actual hearing took place in 1978, the following year. And Waldheim was open to the possibility of having major established presences in the work actually speak at the UN, something that had never happened before. At the time, I had one contemporary colleague, Antonio Huneeus. Antonio was a great historian, retired now. He had a degree in journalism from the Sorbonne. He's a Chilean-American national. His father was a Chilean diplomat. And he also worked on the paper as well with me. Next picture. Okay, so it just basically lays out the specifics here. I knew that I wasn't getting paid for this job, but I didn't care because my payment was going to be that I would be able to attend these historic sessions of the United Nations General Assembly Special Political Committee. A day before it was scheduled, which was in late November of 1978, New York City was hit by a major snowstorm, a blizzard, and it continued into the next day. One of our speakers, legendary astronaut Gordon Cooper, was unable to attend. I think he was going to be flying in from Texas. Airports were absolutely closed. There was no way to do it. Next. Again, some of the nomenclature issued for that day. As you can see, it's the 27th of November in top right. And I had left my home, which is a loft in Chinatown that morning, got into my one suit, headed up to the UN, which was no problem really. It was just a short bus ride, and was very excited. My parents, who had been following this subject with me since I had started a few years before, both took the day off from work and met me at the UN and watched the events transpire with me. Next, please. At the time, it was a very simple matter to get through security. This, again, is so far before the age of terrorism, so to say. And there was a real buzz in the audience. One of the first things I noticed when we were seated was that there were quite a number of empty seats in the area where the delegates should be sitting. Many of them begged off because it was, a snowy day. but in fact, many of them were absolutely loath to attend. The very idea that a subject that they had been brought up with to understand was nonsense was going to be seriously taken in the UN, and that they would be obligated to report that back to their host countries and leaders and maybe take the ridicule themselves. It was obvious that this was an issue, and that as many of these men and women as possible had decided not to attend. Next image. Okay, once again, title page here. The speakers that afternoon were well known to us now. Dr. Jacques Vallée, Dr. Alan Hynek, nuclear physicist Stanton T. Friedman, and a very important UFO witness of a recent case at the time, a Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Coyne, who the month or so before had been involved in an event as a helicopter pilot, military of course, over Ohio, of encountering a very large anomalous object, which sent him into something of a panic, and he threw the helicopter into a dive. It did not respond. In fact, it lifted up 1,800 feet before it was released and back under its own control. To hear these four men speak in this forum, I knew I was living through a serious moment in history. Again, I had never even been to a UFO conference, so I was starting out kind of at the top, so to say. Also, and next slide, Aurelio, please. Okay, so here we see the actual well, the determinations. What this was about was establishment of a committee, an agency or a department in the UN for undertaking, coordinating, and disseminating the results of research into unidentified flying objects and related phenomena. And then in the afternoon, hopefully the establishment of an agency or department moving forward on the same thought. Next. Okay, this is a telex. I was lucky enough to get a number of original materials. We had, within the field of ufology, the big buzz at that time was about 6 weeks before, a young pilot named Frederick Valentich, Australian, was in a Cessna, a very safe, very popular private plane, just off the coast of Australia, when he reported a gigantic UFO. And several times when the tower asked him to be more specific, he like me right now, he became very unable to describe it, except that it was huge and it was not a plane. This was all being recorded, of course, and then came something like, if I remember correctly, 16 seconds of the sound of what sounded like metal scraping on metal. And then the plane disappeared from radar. There was no oil slick, there was no trace of it. And the Australian ambassador to the United Nations, next please, was in the audience. And next please. Here we have our first shot of our little group here. In the center front, at the Grenada spot, is Alan Hynek. To our left, far left, is Sir Eric Gary's first in command, so to say, Wellington Friday, and that's Sir Eric wearing the sunglasses there. I ask that you look at the expression on the face of the representative from Guatemala to the left, lower. It's emblematic of the faces of everybody that I was looking at. Absolutely, in psychology, the term is flat affect. absolutely no expression. You're just, you could almost be a photograph. You're that still and that non-expressive. Next. Okay, these were actually very helpful. The photographs that I received from the United Nations were all original prints, and on the back of each was one of these descriptors of what we were actually seeing there. Next. And once again, we see in the hot seat there, Grenada, that is Jacques Vallée, well before he had white hair. You see Dr. Hynek, upper left. Also, I should note, Dr. Hynek was fairly famous for being a pipe smoker. And this was the old days. I think if you were a smoker, by law in New York City, you had to smoke indoors. And that's a joke, folks. You can laugh. But you see him smoking away there in the General Assembly, not something you would see today. Next, please. Okay, once again, giving us the information on Dr. Vallée. And next. Stan T. Friedman, a mentor of mine, a good friend, one of the greatest ufologists of all time, and a hell of a debater. He made his points so well, you could almost see the discomfort expanding on the faces of those there. And I believe it was Stan who read the prepared statement that Gordon Cooper would have given had he been able to attend into the official record. Next, please. And there's Gordon Cooper himself. And next. This is Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Coyne. That's C-O-Y-N-E. And if any of you are curious, I encourage you to follow up on any notes I'm giving here, anything that I'm saying. Coyne's description, and he was not alone in that helicopter, of what they experienced, the massive size of this object pulling them up while they truly mechanically were doing everything they could to dive down, is hair-raising. It's easy for a story like this to get lost in the thousands of accounts that have come between now and 1978. But he was a very compelling witness. I will certainly say that for him. Next, please. And here we have the information on Coyne. And next. Okay, this is the account from the General Assembly nomenclature that was handed out to everybody of Lieutenant Colonel Coyne's event. And being that these lectures that I'm proud to be a part of here at the Danbury Public Library will be public, and that you can watch them at no cost at your leisure. I'm not going to read everything that's here, but you are certainly welcome to in your own time. Next, please. Okay. This is the object that was observed by, well, from the coast of Australia that was coming in over Frederick Valentich Jr.'s plane. His father also is a pilot. And again, the representative for Australia was there in the audience. And for the life of me, I don't remember which gentleman it was. It might have been Stanton Friedman. It might have been Jacques Vallée, who literally pointed at the Australian ambassador and said words to the effect of, Mr. Ambassador, a citizen of Australia has been kidnapped, has been taken. He may be dead. This is in total violation of, international law, of the laws of your sovereign country. can you give us any statement, or what have you done? What are you? And the man just glared at him. He didn't say a word, but you, since I had, as he would have been very happy to get out of his seat and strangle Dr. Valet or Stan, who was ever saying it. How dare they embarrass him in this manner about something that we all know is nonsense? Next, please. That is Frederick Valentich Sr. with a photograph of his son. No trace of Frederick Valentich Jr. was ever found. No trace of his plane was ever found, and it was not flying that far offshore. A very thorough search was done. The plane, Valentich, for lack of a better term, or for me, a more logical deduction, were both taken. Next, please. This is the plane, I think a Cessna 152, that Valentich Jr. was piloting, and that is who knows where now. Next, please. And this was a witness drawing of the craft that was above the plane when it disappeared. Next, please. Okay, again, the representative from Guatemala. I should say this was, of course, well before the age of cell phones or the internet, and not surprisingly, photography was forbidden in the General Assembly. Certainly, official pictures were available, but I'm sorry that I couldn't have gotten photos of all of these representatives. Their expressions were so telling, and it's a very human thing. I was, of course, completely enwrapped in everything that was going on, just a human sponge trying to take it all in. And at the break, discussing it, everything that we were seeing with my parents and other people that were in the hallway. Next, please. This is the representative from Greece, also during testimony, and looks like he'd be a pretty good poker player to me. Again, their faces were implacable. They didn't move. Next, please. Wellington Friday on the left and Sir Eric on the right. This initiative, I don't know if it could have been carried off by a representative from a larger first world country. Sir Eric was something of a renegade. He was very outspoken on his views on UFOs and the paranormal. And he wanted this to happen very much. Next image. Okay, this is at a break in the lobby of the Secretariat building. It is, you can tell it is the 70s by my father's sideburns, by my glasses, and my mother's smoking a Pall Mall cigarette there. While we were talking, an official UN photographer came up to us and just asked us who we were and, you know, what we were about, and asked us if he could take our picture, and there it is. Next, please. Okay, back we go. Once again, the New York Times covers the story and calls the meeting uninspiring. I couldn't have disagreed with the New York Times less, and I think Secretary General Waldheim felt the same way. It was very important to him. I should also say, at the time, of course, we all knew Waldheim was German and that he had been, you know, in the war. But sometime after this hearing, it did come out that he had been in the SS, which made him somewhat unpopular. And not that long after, a new Secretary General took over. Next, please. Okay, this is a map of the nation of Grenada. And while Secretary Waldheim was meeting with Sir Eric Gary in a follow-up meeting, a coup took place in Grenada. The leader of the other political party declared that he was taking over the nation because it had been discovered that Sir Eric Gary believed in witchcraft, was involved in devil worship, and believed that aliens were visiting the earth. I can assure you as much as I can, not that I was there, but that this was a total setup. And President Reagan used it as an excuse to invade Grenada. Meanwhile, while Sir Eric is in New York, the American force made their way to a small medical school where a number of American students were. No harm, no threats on the part of the Grenadians, but they were evacuated. And Sir Eric became a man without a country. Next, please. And there we see it. America has certainly interceded in some ways over the decades where it had no business being, but this has always stayed with me, given that the event was UFO related. Next, please. Okay, once again, this is the actual program from the event. And I'm going to, because we're doing great on time now, I'm going to go back a little backtracking here just to give you an idea of what was said by the various presenters. Wellington Friday, again, second in command in Grenada, had said that the first International Congress on the UFO phenomena had passed a unanimous resolution supporting Grenada's 1978 request that this be treated seriously in the United Nations. Dr. Hynek told how the Gallup poll statistics had confirmed numbers of exciting worldwide, that there were actual physiological effects, that the French government had taken it very seriously. And then Dr. Jacques Vallée went on and observed that there was a new social movement that now existed, which was based on the expectation of contact with beings from outer space. I would say that's actually visionary. He was discussing this in 1978. And in fact, in our post-disclosure age, I think it's fair to say that this is kind of what's been going on as we move closer to full disclosure. Vallée also went on to talk about the problems, the challenges that were faced, namely that official science discarded this whole idea as nonsense, and we had to find a way to enroll mainstream science in the seriousness of the subject. Next, please. Yes, a backstory, and an important one. For those of you watching who, to one degree or another, are becoming seriously involved in this subject and the challenges that we will face when things change, I want to acknowledge a friend here and underscore a very important point, especially if, like me, you decide to move deeper into this work and perhaps write a paper, do a research project, put together a documentary. give a talk at your local library. Never believe the myth that individuals are incapable of changing things. It's one of the things that keeps change from happening. That myth that, oh, what can I do? I'm only one person. Next image. This is a young man who grew up in New Hampshire. Came of age in the 60s and was absolutely changed by the world of folk music and its potential to assist in social change, and decided what he was going to do with his life was be a folk singer, inspired by the likes of Bob Dylan, Dave Van Ronk, Joan Baez, and on down the pantheon. He moved to New York City and found an apartment in Queens, New York, and began to visit all of the clubs in Greenwich Village and start to get dates and started to perform. Next image. Here he is. Next. At a certain point, he had really started to make it. He was actually being able to pay his bills doing this and had no other intention other than to become a successful folk singer. But then something happened and his whole world changed. Next, please. In 1975, wow, out in a rural area with a number of friends, a fully articulated triangle V-shaped UFO came right in over where they were and shone a bluish light down to the ground. Well, that was that for folk singing. This young man immediately became obsessed with the subject of UFOs, truly anomalous ones, and decided he was going to do something to make a difference. Next, please. Here he is in 1988 when we met. Again, we're talking back in the 70s now. His name was Lee Spiegel. We lost him to cancer about 2 years ago. Lee was the greatest. He grew to be a remarkable journalist, worked for the Huffington Post for years, and probably became the most distinguished single UFO related journalist in the world. When we met 10 years after the event in the United Nations, he was the youngest syndicated radio show, talk show broadcaster in America. He had his own show on NBC. And during that, after the show, we were chatting. Next image. And the story that he told me made my jaw drop. The whole effort putting together this event at the UN, contacting these leading figures in the work, coordinating it with the Secretary General and with Sir Eric Gehry. Wasn't Eric Gehry doing it? It was Lee Spiegel, a 20-something-year-old guy from New Hampshire, who essentially contacted the head of a country and said, I am with you on this. If you get me official credentials to be part of your delegation, I will pull together the best team imaginable to speak at the UN, and maybe we can make a difference. Next. At the head of the table there is Kurt Waldheim. Lower left, Gordon Cooper. Next to him, Jacques Vallée. Next to him, I think Colonel Coyne, then Hynek, then Sir Eric. On the other side of the table, that dark head of hair that we're seeing almost nothing else of, that's Lee. Next image. Once again, in color this time, we see all of the principals and Lee Spiegel. I mean, imagine, not much more than a kid, well, mid-20s, you're still pretty young. And he decides he's going to make this happen. And he does. Next, please. A very telling color photo. Of course, we have Hynek in the background left, Sir Eric in front of him, Jacques Vallée in front of him, Wellington Friday to the right. And who is he speaking to? In the upper right, the man behind the whole event, Lee Spiegel. Next, please. Not surprisingly, Lee became friends with another man who was minding his business, living his life, and a blue beam of light from a truly anomalous UFO changed that big time. Certain people still, when they're gone, they loom so large in your life that they're always still there in a way. And that will always be Lee for me. Next, please. We had more fun together in the years that we knew each other than almost seems legal. Damn cancer, but boy, were we lucky to have this guy for the time we had him. Next, please. That's Lee and I, and in the middle there is Paul Davids, another remarkable guy. Paul was really the force behind the film Roswell. And he also has a small part in it. I think it's one of the finest UFO-related films, minimum on special effects, maximum on the impact that being identified and associated with this subject can have on a person. Next, please. And I open the floor to your questions.
And thank you, Peter. That was really, really awesome.
My honor.
So we're going to open the floor. If you want to have, if you have any questions, please type it in the chat. I'll be happy to relay it to Peter the best I can.
Somebody has a question. I know it. I think I know it.
Let me see if I can try to do a question here for you, Peter. Did anything happen afterwards? Was there any movement
Yeah.
as a result of this conference? Or
It's
was
a-
it kind of brushed off or sort of kind of dissipated? Maybe little ripples here and there have happened, but nothing
It's
as
a
we're seeing nowadays with these congressional hearings where there's like a lot more the mass audience that it has.
I should have attended to that question at the end of that section, but an important question it is. Much to my surprise, the committee passed the resolution to consider a resolution. So it was, there it was on the record. The news was announced the next day, which was terribly exciting for people like me. And then over the next few months, it was simply allowed to die in committee. It was ignored. One could argue that certain people in the UN who wanted to look like something had happened went through the motions, but made sure that there was no study committee that was going to happen. And that was the last time that a resolution like this was ever brought up in the United Nations, 1978, or more than 45 years ago. And the UN hasn't touched the subject since.
We do have some questions. The UFO photo from Jutland's the peninsula looks genuine, but is it?
I'm sorry. Just say it again. I have a hearing impairment.
No problem. The UFO photo from the Jutland Peninsula looks genuine, but is it?
Oh, the photo that I showed?
Yes.
Yes. Not only is it genuine, but we had the testimony of the man who took the picture. I believe his name was Hans Peterson. We had access to the actual physical camera that he took the photos with. We had access to the original negatives. And in terms of character, Peterson was without flaw, an honorable, decent guy in business in Denmark, who wanted to get some pictures of his dog on a walk and had his camera at just the right moment.
Thanks, Peter. We have another question. I'm surprised that President Reagan would use the UFO topic against Sir Eric. Didn't Reagan have his own sighting? And didn't he give a speech at the UN talking about facing an alien threat from another world?
Fabulous questions. Yes. First of all, we know that he had a profound interest in the subject because the records indicate, and this is nothing that Reagan ever contested, that as governor, flying with a number of people, including his wife in the governor's plane, they were tracked by a fully articulated disc that everyone saw. And that even though something that you probably shouldn't blab about if you're governor of a state, he and Nancy were late for a dinner party that night with a number of Hollywood luminaries there. And they blurted it all out when they got there. Also, the pilot of that plane gave a full interview with the governor's permission, confirming that what they saw was a fully articulated disc. That would have been in the 60s. And whatever compelled President Reagan to invade Grenada at that moment in 1978, I don't know if it was UFO related, but it's simply a fact. And another fact, and it's the last part of the question that was asked, at the 45th meeting of the General Assembly, President Reagan spoke and gave a talk that said all the things that one would expect a president to say, and then did something extraordinary. And we can confirm this. He completely veered away from his prepared text. I know this because a colleague of mine some years ago had an opportunity to chat with the Reagan's speechwriter, one of them. His name was Peter Roberts, which I always have to laugh at because it makes me seem like I remember names, but this one's easy for me. And what my friend Ron was told was that if he could go to the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, and present himself as a scholar on this subject, they might allow him to see the original printout, double-spaced for easy reading, except that in the left margin, in Reagan's very distinctive handwriting, was written notes on the comments he was going to make that nobody saw coming, including his national security advisor, Colin Powell, or anyone else in the Reagan delegation. It began by him saying, and I may be off by a word or two here, I often wonder what if humanity knew that they were faced with a genuine threat from outer space. Wouldn't we all come together and act as one and see ourselves as human beings first and put aside our differences and off in that direction. He then did something, I think, very elegant in terms of language to get himself back down to earth and get back to the talk he was doing. He added the remark to the effect of, but isn't there an invader among us now? Isn't hunger? Isn't ignorance? Isn't war? And then went back into his prepared text. So for me, well, for you, let's say the President of the United States, and by your own experience, you know this phenomena is real. You know you can't talk about it. You know you can't write a memoir and include it. But perhaps you can let the world know that you knew years in the future when all this comes out. Yep, Reagan knew. And that's why he said what he said, off the record, off his prepared remarks on that day at the 45th General Assembly meeting, which would have been in the 80s.
Thank you, Peter. Did the president of Grenada have a personal UFO sighting?
He did. He did. As nice as you please, it's an island nation. He watched a disc-shaped object track along in the sky. I don't remember from his account whether he was alone or with other people, but that's why he was so adamant and really didn't care, what other world leaders thought about what he thought about this subject. He knew they were real because he had seen at least one himself.
In your opinion, what happens next? How will the government, the UN, bring more information about this to the public?
Isn't that the big question? Well, there's a process going on now. We'll call it disclosure with a capital D. It's going on in the House of Representatives. Leading scientists are now embracing the reality of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications for humanity. Major public figures take it seriously and realize now that doing so is not going to make them lose their livelihood or may become a laughingstock. There are certainly a number of theories floating around on what's the next step. I am really sure that I don't know, but I can make some educated guesses just as you can, that perhaps at some point, this is going back to the war in Vietnam, when a psychiatrist named Daniel Ellsberg, who worked for the government and privy to a great deal of embarrassing information about Vietnam, simply released it. The Ellsberg paper, so to say, plenty to read about that. And you couldn't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Same thing for a number of major whistleblowers. Maybe it will come that way. Maybe we will simply just hit a point where in the general population, we hit a tipping point and people just start to take it as real based on that more and more people are having these experiences and not afraid to speak about them. Also, I mean, it's kind of a wild card, but perhaps they, at a certain point, for their own reasons, will think or say or act on the idea of enough. We've given you several thousand years to ponder this in modern times, so to say, actively, at least since 1947. And we're here. Get used to it. It may come another way. I think it's anybody's guess at this point how it's going to play out.
So you don't think this is just another cycle? This is going to quiet down. It's already like what you said, the toothpaste is out, we can't put it back in the tube. We're not gonna, this is gonna just sort of build up until what happens,
You remind me, Aurelio, that over the years that I've been a part of this work and certainly had my eyes on what people are saying, trends and thinking, that every 7 or 8 years, that's probably not even an active measurement, but every once in a while, it's just there's an oversaturation on the subject. Right now, think about all of the television shows and all of the podcasts and all of the conferences and all of the books. I remember 1997, that summer was the 50th anniversary of Roswell. America went a little UFO crazy. Every broadcast media venue trotted out every single UFO documentary imaginable. There were all kinds of extra one-off glossy magazines on the stands that summer. I spent a good deal of that summer in England. A book I had co-authored had taken off like a skyrocket there and was one of the top 10 best-selling books of that summer. And the same thing was happening in England. The reason I bring it up is because by that autumn and into the next year, there was a very noticeable quiet regarding the subject of UFOs in the newspapers, in the magazines, in radio broadcasts, and in terms of new documentaries. And then it came roaring back again.
What other member nations of the UN expressed an interest in the UFO committee?
I don't remember any of the particular delegates that did. Again, we knew it was important to Secretary General Waldheim, who may have had other sources of information. If you're Secretary General, you certainly would be privy to news sources that you and I would not. I don't remember any coverage of a single delegate representing a single country other than Grenada that was behind this. Again, take a moment to think about being a delegate for the United Nations, whether you're from England, France, or a tiny little third world country. All of a sudden, you have this amazing job, a nice apartment in New York City, an expense account. You're meeting with the movers and shakers. You're in one of the most exciting places in the world. And the last thing you want to do is jeopardize your position and this wonderful part of your life by heading home and saying, dear Mr. President or Prime Minister or whoever you report back to, I think this whole UFO thing is really serious and we need to get on board with it. Thank you very much. Your services are no longer required and we will replace you very shortly. I'm being a bit coy here, but to the best of my knowledge, none of them had any public interest. It would not surprise me if some of them had private interest, but I don't know how we would be able to ascertain that information.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Dr. Hynek and Jacques Vallée personally?
I did meet Dr. Hynek and corresponded with Jacques Vallée on and off for some years. Dr. Hynek and I met in 1983 in Westchester, New York, during the so-called triangular craft overflights. It was at a time, really, golden age of early video cameras, and many of the local folks were shooting footage. It became so out of control on a certain level that major media had to acknowledge it. And on this particular, I think it was a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, the largest high school in Westchester opened up its doors and its auditorium for an open, like a citizen's hearing on the subject. And one resident after another got up there and talked about the UFOs they had seen, the reactions of their animals if it was on a farm, or most people had footage to show. And Dr. Hynek was there. I was introduced to him by my second mentor, a tough, no-nonsense New York City police detective named Pete Mazzola, who was also a crack ufologist. And needless to say, it was a thrill to meet him. I could see he was not well, and later learned he had cancer, and he died from it some months after that. But I did have the pleasure of meeting him, and I'll always be very thankful to my friend Pete for that. I
Thank
will
you.
also say it was another 10 years before I really connected, well, 9 years, with Stanton Friedman, and began a friendship with him, which was in 1987 at that year's International MUFON Symposium, which was in Washington, D.C. at American University, and the 40th anniversary of Roswell and the modern age of UFO sightings. And shortly after that, we did a television show together in Canada. And from that point on, I was able to build a wonderful acquaintanceship at first, and then friendship that lasted until he passed.
That's really good to hear. And part of this conference is also like trying to cultivate these relationships and friendships that culminate from this. And I'm happy that we've met Peter, even though virtually, but we will continue on in future conferences as this goes on. So everyone, thank you, for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank Peter Robbins again for sharing his expertise, his personal experience, and his time with us for the Western Connecticut UFO Conference for 2025. Thank you all. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. And also, if you're in the Danbury, Connecticut area, come on by at 10 a.m. We're going to have some really good two presentations on October 25th. And Peter, if you can, you're always you have a standing invitation to come down and visit. And so please come on by anytime. And thank you.
I would love to, Aurelio, and anything that gets me to Connecticut, I will be in touch with you post haste.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow.